Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet the old fat pig we have to put up with. The words hit me like ice water. Standing there in my emerald green dress that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, I watched Bradley's new bride, Sophia, gesture toward me with a champagne flute while her wealthy family erupted in laughter. Then her father's face went white as fresh snow. Wait, aren't you Margaret Harrison, my new boss at Harrison Industries? Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how I ended up being called a pig at my own son's wedding. The wedding I'd paid for entirely down to the last rose petal. 2 hours earlier, I'd been adjusting Bradley's bow tie in the church vest, proud as any mother could be. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. I know the wedding cost a fortune, $300,000 to be exact. Not that I was counting. I'd watched him fidget with his cufflinks, the ones his father wore at our wedding 32 years ago before cancer took him when Bradley was 12. "Your father would be so proud," I whispered, straightening his shoulders. But as I stood in that reception hall listening to my son's new in-laws mock me openly, I realized pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. The Harrison family owned half the commercial real estate in Chicago. James Harrison, Sophia's father, controlled a business empire worth billions. What he didn't know was that his company's board had voted me in as CEO exactly 1 week ago. My first official day was Monday morning. Mrs. Harrison James stammered his champagne glass, trembling slightly. I had no idea. Sophia never mentioned what Daddy Sophia's voice was sharp with confusion. She looked between us, her perfect smile faltering, that Bradley's mother is Margaret Harrison. The silence spread like spilled wine across white linen. Sophia's mother, Patricia, stepped forward with the kind of smile wealthy women perfect in finishing school. "Oh my goodness, what a delightful coincidence. You share the same last name as my husband's company." "Not a coincidence," I said calmly, watching James's face cycle through several shades of pale. "I kept my married name after my husband died. Harrison Industries was his family's business. I inherited his shares when he passed." The math was simple enough even for people distracted by champagne. Controlling interest, voting power, the ability to hire and fire anyone I pleased. Sophia's laughter died completely. "You're saying you own Daddy's company, not own dear. Control." I smiled the same smile I'd used in 100 board meetings. "There's a difference." Bradley appeared at my elbow, finally sensing the tension. "Mom, is everything okay?" I looked at my son. This man I'd raised alone after losing his father, who'd worked 2 jobs to put through business school, who'd sacrificed everything to give him every opportunity, and realized he'd positioned himself slightly closer to his new wife than to me. "Everything's perfect, sweetheart," I said, patting his arm. "I was just getting acquainted with your new family." James cleared his throat, his business instincts finally kicking in. "Mrs. Harrison, perhaps we could schedule a meeting next week. I'd love to discuss." "Monday morning," I interrupted smoothly. 900 sharp. My assistant will send you the address. I turned to Sophia with my warmest smile. "Congratulations on your marriage. Dear, I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other." As I walked away, I heard Sophia hiss to her mother. "Why didn't you tell me she was somebody important?" "We didn't know," Patricia whispered back frantically. "Your father said Bradley's mother was just some middle-class widow. Just some middle-class widow." The words followed me to the ladies' room where I locked the door and stared at my reflection. My dress was elegant, my jewelry modest, but real, my makeup perfect, despite the emotional earthquake I just experienced. In the mirror, I saw a woman who'd spent 30 years building a business empire in her husband's memory. A woman who'd raised a son alone, paid for his education, his apartment, his car, and now his wedding. A woman who'd been called a pig by people who didn't realize she could destroy their entire world with a single phone call. But most importantly, I saw a woman who was just beginning to understand her own power. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. Board meeting moved to Tuesday. Emergency HR situation requires immediate attention Monday. I smiled at my reflection and began reapplying my lipstick. Monday was going to be very interesting indeed. The path to that humiliating moment had started 18 months earlier, when I'd made the mistake of being too generous with my son's happiness. Bradley had called on a Tuesday evening, his voice carrying that particular tone that meant he needed something expensive. "Mom, I've got incredible news." Sophia said yes. I'd been reviewing quarterly reports in my home office, but I set everything aside. My son was engaged. Despite everything else, the mother in me was genuinely thrilled. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. When did you propose last night at Aurelio's? You know that fancy place downtown where you took me for my graduation dinner?" I remembered. The bill had been $400 for 2 people, but seeing Bradley's face that night, so proud of his MBA, had made every penny worth it. "Tell me everything," I said, settling back in my chair. For the next hour, Bradley described the proposal, the ring which cost more than most people's cars, and Sophia's reaction. What he didn't mention was how they planned to pay for a wedding. That conversation came a month later. "The thing is, Mom," Bradley said, his fingers drumming against my kitchen table, "Sophia's family has certain expectations." I poured him more coffee, noting how he avoided eye contact. After raising him alone, I knew all his tells. What kind of expectations? Well, her sister's wedding was at the Four Seasons. 300 guests, very elegant affair. I'm sure it was beautiful. And her cousin got married at the Drake Hotel. Sophia's been dreaming of something similar since she was a little girl. I waited. In business, silence was often the most powerful negotiation tool. "The venues she's looking at are around $200,000, he said quickly. "Just for the basics, not including flowers, music, photography, all the other things." 200,000 Ds, I repeated calmly. "I know it sounds like a lot, but Mom, she's the one. I want to give her everything she deserves." "What about what you deserve?" I thought. "What about what I deserve after sacrificing everything for your happiness?" But I looked at my son's face, so hopeful, so young, despite being 31 years old, and I felt the familiar tug of maternal love overriding common sense. "Have you talked to Sophia about a smaller wedding you don't understand? Her family, they're wealthy, Mom. Really wealthy. Her father owns Harrison Industries." The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had no idea that I'd been quietly acquiring shares in James Harrison's company for years, building toward the controlling interest my husband had always dreamed of securing. "And you feel pressure to match their lifestyle." "I want to be worthy of her," he said simply. Those 6 words broke my heart. I'd raised this boy to believe he was worthy of anything, anyone. How had I failed so completely that he thought love required a price tag? "Bradley, if she loves you, a courthouse ceremony would be enough." "Mom, please. I'm not asking you to pay for everything. Just help us get started. I'll pay you back once my career takes off." His career. Bradley had graduated with his MBA a year earlier and was working at a mid-level consulting firm, making decent money but nowhere near enough to support the lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to through Sophia's family. How much help are we talking about? Maybe $250,000, $300 at most, $300,000. The number sat between us like an unwelcome dinner guest. "Bradley, that's more money than most people make in 5 years. I know, but you can afford it, right? The business is doing well." And after Dad's life insurance, he trailed off, realizing how callous that sounded. My husband's death had indeed left me financially comfortable, but hearing my son calculate the value of his father's life so casually made me feel sick. "Let me think about it," I said. That night, I sat in my husband's study looking at his photograph on the desk. We'd built Harrison Industries together, starting with a single small office building and growing it into one of Chicago's premier commercial real estate companies. After he died, I'd continued expanding, making strategic acquisitions, building the empire he'd envisioned. What would you do? I asked his picture, but I already knew the answer. Robert had always been too generous with Bradley, unable to deny him anything. It was one of the few areas where we disagreed. The next morning, I called Bradley and told him yes. Looking back now, standing in that bathroom mirror after being called a pig by my son's new in-laws, I realized that single word yes had been the beginning of my transformation from doing mother into something far more dangerous. Because by Monday morning, I would be their new boss. And unlike my son, they were about to learn that my generosity had limits. Monday morning arrived with Chicago's typical autumn chill, and I dressed accordingly. Power suit, minimal jewelry hair, pulled back in the style that had intimidated corporate America for the past 20 years. At exactly 9 hours, I walked into the Harrison Industries boardroom, where James Harrison sat fidgeting with his phone like a nervous teenager. "Mrs. Harrison," he stood quickly extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet so early, Mr. Harrison," I replied, taking the seat at the head of the conference table that was rightfully mine. "Though I think we need to clarify something before we begin." I opened my briefcase and removed a folder containing the stock certificates, board resolutions, and legal documentation that proved my controlling interest in his family's company. As of last Monday, I own 51% of Harrison Industries, which means this is my boardroom and you work for me. James' face cycled through several emotions before settling on barely controlled panic. "Mrs. Harrison, I think there's been some misunderstanding. This company has been in my family for 3 generations. Built on land and initial capital provided by my husband's grandfather in 1952, I corrected calmly. Your grandfather was the junior partner, Mr. Harrison. The contracts are quite clear." I slid a manila envelope across the polished table. Inside were photocopies of the original partnership agreements documents I'd spent years tracking down through legal archives and private collections. Your family managed the business beautifully while maintaining minority ownership. But when my husband died, his shares passed to me. I've spent the last 15 years quietly purchasing additional stock whenever it became available. "This is impossible," James whispered, but his hands shook as he flipped through the paperwork. "The impossible part," I said, allowing a small smile, "is that you didn't notice your own board approved my appointments to key positions. Your CFO reports directly to me. Your legal team answers my calls." James looked up with something approaching horror. "What do you want?" "First, I want an apology for your daughter's behavior at the wedding reception. Sophia can be spirited. She didn't mean anything by those comments. She called me a pig, Mr. Harrison, in front of 200 guests, including my son. She's young. She's 28 years old and married to my son. Old enough to understand consequences." I leaned forward slightly. "Here's what's going to happen. Sophia will call me today and apologize sincerely for her behavior. Not because you told her to, but because she understands that respect isn't optional in this family." James nodded quickly. "Of course, I'll speak with her immediately. Second, we're going to restructure this company's employee benefits program. I've reviewed your current policies, and they're embarrassingly inadequate for a business of this size." This was actually true. Harrison Industries employed over 300 people, but their health insurance was mediocre, and their retirement plan was nearly non-existent. "The improvements will cost approximately $2 million annually," I continued. "Consider it my contribution to social responsibility." $2 million, James's voice cracked slightly. "You can afford it. I've seen your profit margins." I pulled out another folder. This one containing detailed financial analysis I'd commissioned months earlier. Every expense, every revenue stream, every hidden asset the company possessed. Third, your son-in-law Bradley will be receiving a promotion to senior associate with appropriate salary adjustment. He's actually quite bright when he applies himself. I didn't realize Bradley worked here. He doesn't yet. I smiled again, this time with genuine warmth. His first day is Wednesday. James stared at me like I just declared myself Queen of Illinois. Mrs. Harrison, I need to discuss these changes with my staff, my attorneys. Your attorneys already reviewed everything last week. They're very thorough. I stood closing my briefcase with a decisive snap. The employee benefits announcement will be made Thursday. Sophia's apology will happen today. Bradley's promotion will be effective immediately. I walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. Oh, and Mr. Harrison, in the future, when your family gathers to discuss the middle-class widow, your daughter married into you, might want to mention that said widow now controls your family's primary source of income. James's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Have a lovely day, I said cheerfully and walked out into my new corporate empire. By noon, my assistant had fielded 6 phone calls from various Harrison family members, 3 from their family attorney, and 1 very panicked voicemail from Sophia herself. Mrs. Harrison, this is Sophia Bradley's wife. My father explained that there's been some sort of misunderstanding about the company, and I wanted to call, and well, I hope we can discuss things like family. I listened to the message twice, noting the careful way she avoided mentioning the pig comment or offering any actual apology. At 2 p.m., she called again. This time, her voice was noticeably shakier. Mrs. Harrison. I realize my comments at the reception may have been inappropriate. I was nervous meeting Bradley's family, and sometimes I say things without thinking. I hope you can understand. Still no real apology. Still positioning herself as the victim. The third call came at 4:30 p.m. Mrs. Harrison, please call me back. I think we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd really like to make this right. Bradley is upset. My father is having some kind of crisis, and I just want to understand what's happening. I deleted all 3 messages without returning her calls. Tuesday morning, James Harrison appeared at my office door at 8 a.m., sharp-looking like he hadn't slept. Mrs. Harrison, please. Sophia is beside herself. She's young and made a mistake. Surely we can work this out as reasonable people. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Mr. Harrison, let me explain something about reasonable behavior. When someone pays for your daughter's entire wedding venue, food, flowers, music, photography, reasonable behavior would be gratitude or at minimum basic courtesy. You paid for the wedding, every penny, $312,000. I pulled out the receipts I'd requested from Bradley the night before. Would you like to see the invoices? James stared at the papers spread across my desk, his face growing paler with each line item. She had no idea, he whispered. No, she didn't. Because your family makes assumptions about people without bothering to learn the facts. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking downtown Chicago, watching the morning traffic crawl through the streets below. But here's what I find most interesting, Mr. Harrison. Your daughter can afford to mock the woman who paid for her wedding because she knows her family has money. She can afford to be cruel because she's never faced consequences for her actions. I turned back to him with a smile that would have made sharks nervous. That's about to change. By Thursday afternoon, the employee benefits announcement had sent shockwaves through Harrison Industries that reached far beyond the office walls. Word spread quickly through Chicago's tight-knit business community. Margaret Harrison wasn't just the new CEO. She was the new sheriff, and she was making changes. The first sign that my message was being received came Wednesday evening when Bradley called, his voice tight with confusion and something that might have been fear. Mom Sophia's father offered me a job today. Senior associate starting salary, 90,000 plus benefits. It's a great opportunity, but it feels weird like charity. And Sophia's been acting strange since the wedding. She won't tell me what's wrong, just keeps asking questions about our family's finances. I smiled into my phone. Did you take the job? Well, yes. I mean, it's double what I was making at the consulting firm. But Mom, did you have something to do with this? Bradley, you're a bright young man with an MBA and strong analytical skills. Perhaps Mr. Harrison simply recognized your potential. Right, he said, but his tone suggested he wasn't buying it. Mom, is there something you're not telling me about the Harrison family? Why don't you ask your wife? She might have some insights. The second sign came Thursday morning when my assistant informed me that Mrs. Patricia Harrison, Sophia's mother, had requested a lunch meeting. The woman who'd stood silently by while her daughter called me a pig now wanted to chat over salads. Tell her I'm available tomorrow at noon, the Chicago Club private dining room. Friday arrived gray and drizzly, perfectly matching my mood as I sat in the elegant dining room waiting for Patricia Harrison to make her entrance. She arrived precisely on time, dressed in the kind of understated elegance that screamed expensive without being flashy. Margaret, she said warmly, as if we were old friends. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet. I've been simply dying to get to know you better. Patricia. I gestured to the chair across from me. How lovely to see you again. She settled herself with the practiced grace of a woman who'd attended 1,000 similar lunches, then spent several minutes discussing the weather, the restaurant's reputation, and other meaningless pleasantries. Finally, she got to the point. Margaret, I want to address what happened at the wedding reception. Sophia can be impulsive when she's nervous. She was overwhelmed by the day, and I'm afraid she spoke without thinking. Impulsive, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? She's mortified by her behavior. Absolutely mortified. She wanted to call and apologize personally, but she's been so worried about making things worse. I sipped my water, watching Patricia's carefully constructed composure. And yet she's called my office 3 times without actually apologizing. Patricia's smile flickered slightly. I think she's intimidated by your success. James explained that you've built quite an impressive business empire. My husband and I built it together. I've simply continued his vision. Of course, of course. And speaking of vision, I understand you've made some wonderful changes at Harrison Industries. The employee benefits improvements are so generous. Here it comes. I thought the real reason for this lunch. James is thrilled to have someone with your expertise overseeing operations, Patricia continued. Though I confess, we're a bit concerned about the financial impact of such extensive changes so quickly. Are you questioning my business decisions, Patricia? Oh no, not at all. It's just that James has always run the company conservatively, and sudden large expenditures make him nervous. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Patricia, let me ask you something. What do you know about my son? The question clearly caught her off guard. Bradley. He seems like a lovely young man, very devoted to Sophia. He is devoted to her, perhaps too devoted. Bradley spent his entire savings account on your daughter's engagement ring. Borrowed money for the wedding suit. And when that wasn't enough to meet your family's standards, he came to me. Patricia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. $300,000, Patricia. That's how much your daughter's perfect wedding cost. Not your family's money. Not even Bradley's money. Mine. The color drained from Patricia's face. I had no idea. No, you didn't. Because your family assumes that anyone who doesn't flaunt wealth must not have any. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to just above a whisper. But here's what I find most interesting about your family's finances, Patricia. I've done some research. I pulled out a slim folder and placed it on the table between us. Your husband's company shows impressive revenue, but when you factor in debt service, overhead, and operating expenses, the actual profit margins are quite thin. The Harrison family lifestyle is largely maintained through corporate credit lines and real estate leverage. Patricia stared at the folder like it contained a live snake. In other words, your family's wealth is mostly theoretical, beautiful on paper but highly vulnerable to market fluctuations or changes in corporate leadership. What are you saying? I'm saying that I could fire your husband tomorrow and replace him with someone who actually understands modern business practices. I could restructure the company's debt obligations. I could sell off assets your family considers untouchable. I smiled pleasantly while Patricia's world crumbled behind her eyes. Or, I continued, your daughter can call me tonight and offer a genuine apology for her behavior at the wedding reception. Not because she's intimidated or embarrassed, but because she understands that calling someone a pig is unacceptable, regardless of their perceived social status. Patricia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. And if she apologizes, then we're family, and I take care of family. I stood placing my napkin on the table. But Patricia, understand this. I'm not some middle-class widow who can be dismissed or mocked. I'm the woman who now controls your family's future. I picked up the check that had been discreetly placed on the table. Lunch is on me. Please give Sophia my regards. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Patricia fumbling with her phone, already dialing her daughter's number. My own phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. Emergency board meeting called for Monday. James Harrison requesting full financial review of recent policy changes. I smiled as I stepped into the Chicago drizzle. Let them call their meetings. By Monday, I'd be ready with surprises they couldn't possibly anticipate. After all, I was just getting started. Sophia's call came at 9:47 p.m. That Friday night, just as I was settling into my leather armchair with a glass of wine and my husband's favorite book of poetry, her voice was different this time, smaller, stripped of the entitled confidence that had carried her through our previous encounters. Mrs. Harrison, this is Sophia. I know it's late, but I couldn't wait until tomorrow. Good evening, Sophia. I owe you an apology, a real one, not the half-hearted attempts I've been making all week. She took a shaky breath. What I said at the reception was cruel and inexcusable. Calling you a pig was wrong no matter what I was feeling or thinking. You paid for our entire wedding, and I repaid your generosity with insults and humiliation. I said nothing, letting her words hang in the air. I've been thinking about why I said it, and I think I was scared. Bradley talks about you constantly, how strong you are, how successful, how you raised him alone after his father died. I felt like I could never measure up to the mother he describes. Interesting. This was more honest than I'd expected. So when I saw you at the reception, I saw this elegant, poised woman, and I felt inadequate small. And instead of dealing with those feelings like an adult, I lashed out to make myself feel bigger by making you smaller. And how did that work out for you? I asked quietly. It didn't. It backfired spectacularly, and now I've hurt the person I should have been thanking. Her voice broke slightly. Mrs. Harrison, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I want to be the kind of wife Bradley deserves and the kind of daughter-in-law you deserve. I took a slow sip of wine, considering her words. There was something in her tone that suggested genuine remorse, though it might have been motivated more by fear than actual understanding. Sophia, thank you for calling. I appreciate your honesty about your motivations. Does this mean can we start over? We can try, I said carefully, but understand that trust is rebuilt through actions, not just words. Yes, absolutely. Whatever I need to do to make this right. I'll give that some thought. In the meantime, I have one question for you. Anything. At the reception, when you introduced me to your family, you clearly believed you were speaking to people who shared your opinion of me, which means this wasn't a spontaneous insult. It was a planned humiliation. Silence stretched between us for nearly 10 seconds. Yes, she whispered. I had told them beforehand that Bradley's mother was difficult, that she was always interfering and trying to insert herself into our relationship. But I've met you exactly twice before the wedding, both times at family dinners Bradley organized. We've spoken for perhaps 20 minutes total. I know. I was repeating what Bradley had said. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own son had been complaining about me to his fiancée, painting me as some kind of meddling mother-in-law before I'd even met her family. What specifically did Bradley tell you about me? He said you had trouble letting go, that you still treated him like a child, that you used money to maintain control over his life. Her voice was barely audible. He said you'd probably try to take over the wedding planning and that I should be firm about boundaries. I closed my eyes, feeling something fundamental shift inside my chest. The son I'd raised, supported, and sacrificed for had been systematically undermining me to justify accepting my financial support while rejecting my emotional presence. Sophia, thank you for your honesty. That took courage. Mrs. Harrison, I realize now that everything he told me was wrong. You're not controlling. You're generous. You're not interfering. You're loving. I should have formed my own opinion instead of accepting his characterization. Yes, you should have. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. But Bradley is my son, and his opinion matters most in this situation. He loves you, Sophia said quickly. He really does. I think he's just confused about how to be grateful without feeling guilty about accepting so much help. Perhaps we'll see. After ending the call, I sat in my husband's study, surrounded by his books and photographs, trying to reconcile the son I thought I knew with the man who apparently saw me as a burden to be managed. Robert's voice seemed to whisper from the shadows. You gave him everything he wanted instead of teaching him to want what he could earn. My phone buzzed with a text from Bradley. Mom Sophia said she talked to you tonight. I hope we can all have dinner soon and work things out. I hate that there's tension in the family. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. We definitely need to talk soon. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was reading the business section of the Tribune when my doorbell rang at 8:00 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw James Harrison standing on my front porch, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. Mr. Harrison, I said, opening the door. This is a surprise. Mrs. Harrison, I apologize for the early hour. I was hoping we could speak privately before Monday's board meeting. I led him to my living room, noting how his eyes took in the understated elegance of my home. Quality furniture, original artwork, family photographs that spoke of a life well lived rather than wealth displayed. Coffee, please. He settled into the chair across from my sofa, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Mrs. Harrison, I want to be direct. I've called an emergency board meeting because I need to understand your intentions for Harrison Industries. My intentions are simple: to run a profitable, ethical business that serves its employees and community well. The employee benefits changes alone will cost the company nearly $2 million annually. The facility improvements you've authorized add another $500,000. These aren't sustainable expenditures given our current profit margins. I poured coffee from the silver service that had been my wedding gift 32 years earlier. James, what do you know about your company's actual financial position? I know we're profitable, but conservative. We maintain steady growth without taking unnecessary risks. You're profitable, but stagnant, I corrected. Your company owns 37 commercial properties in prime Chicago locations. The rental income alone should generate 50% more revenue than you're currently showing. I handed him a coffee cup and sat down with my own. Your problem isn't profitability, James. It's management. You're running a 21st century real estate empire with 1980s business practices. I've been in this business for 30 years. he said stiffly. And you've done adequately, but adequately isn't enough anymore. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Which brings us to Monday's board meeting. James shifted uncomfortably. The board has some concerns about the rapid pace of change under new leadership. The board consists of 7 members. 3 were appointed by me over the past 18 months. 2 others are longtime business associates who respect my husband's legacy. That leaves you and your cousin, Edward. I watched his face as the mathematics of corporate democracy sank in. In other words, James, your emergency board meeting is going to be very educational for you. He set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. What do you want from us, from my family? I want what I've always wanted. Respect not for my money, not for my corporate position, but for me as a person, worthy of basic human decency. I stood and walked to the mantelpiece where my wedding photograph sat beside pictures of Bradley from birth through college graduation. Your daughter called me a pig at my son's wedding, James. She did it because she believed her family's money made her superior to the woman who'd paid for her celebration. That kind of casual cruelty reveals something ugly about character. Sophia is young. Sophia is old enough to be married, old enough to understand consequences. I turned back to him. But she's not my real problem, is she? James stared at me with growing dread. My real problem is my son, who's been telling his wife that I'm a controlling, interfering mother who uses money to manipulate him. My son, who accepted $300,000 for his wedding while simultaneously resenting me for providing it. Family relationships are complicated. Yes, they are. And Monday morning, we're going to simplify them considerably. I walked him to the door, my mind already working through the details of what Monday's board meeting would bring. Have a lovely weekend, James. Give my regards to your family. As I watched him drive away, I realized that everything up to this point had been preparation. The real battle was just beginning, and this time I intended to win. Monday morning's board meeting began at 9:00 sharp in the Harrison Industries conference room, with James Harrison looking like a man facing his own execution. The other board members filed in with varying degrees of confusion, unaware they were about to witness a corporate revolution. Gentlemen, I said, taking my place at the head of the table, thank you for accommodating this emergency session. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce myself properly to those who may not be familiar with my background. I distributed folders containing my complete professional biography, educational credentials, and the 20-year track record I'd built, expanding my late husband's business interests. As you can see, I'm not some grieving widow playing at businesswoman. I hold an MBA from Northwestern, have successfully managed 8-figure real estate portfolios, and have been quietly acquiring Harrison Industries stock for the past 15 years. Edward Harrison, James's cousin, and the company's longtime treasurer, cleared his throat nervously. Mrs. Harrison, while your credentials are impressive, this company has operated successfully under Harrison Family Management for 60 years. Successfully is a generous term, Edward. I pulled out the comprehensive financial analysis I'd commissioned months earlier. Your revenue growth has been flat for 7 years. Your profit margins have declined consistently since 2018. Your employee retention rate is 30% below industry standards. I watched their faces as the numbers sank in. Meanwhile, you're sitting on prime commercial real estate in Chicago's most desirable locations, charging below market rents because you've prioritized relationship preservation over business optimization. Those relationships are valuable, James protested. We have tenants who've been with us for decades, and they've been taking advantage of your sentimentality for decades. I smiled coldly. Effective immediately, all rental agreements will be reviewed and adjusted to current market rates. Tenants who wish to continue their leases will pay fair value. Those who don't can find alternative accommodations. That's not how we do business, Edward stammered. It's how I do business. And since I control this company, it's how we'll do business going forward. Board member Robert Chen, one of my appointees, spoke up supportively. Mrs. Harrison's analysis is thorough and accurate. Harrison Industries has been underperforming for years. The employee benefits improvements alone will cost us $2 million annually, James said desperately. We can't afford such extravagance. James, your family extracted $8 million in executive salaries last year while contributing essentially nothing to actual business operations. I let that fact settle over the room. Your son works in marketing, but spends most of his time playing golf. Your nephew manages property maintenance by delegating everything to contractors while collecting a 6-figure salary. The silence was deafening. So here's what's going to happen. Executive compensation will be tied directly to performance metrics. The marketing department will either generate measurable results or be eliminated entirely. Property management will be professionalized with actual oversight and accountability. You can't just eliminate family members from family business, Edward protested. I can and I will if they can't justify their positions with actual work. I stood gathering my materials. This meeting is concluded. Implementation of all discussed changes begins tomorrow. Wait, James called out desperately. We need to vote on these proposals. No, James, you need to understand something about corporate governance. I turned back to face the table. I don't need your approval for business decisions. I need your compliance. As I walked toward the door, I heard Edward whisper to James, "How did we let this happen?" The answer was simple. They'd been so focused on maintaining their comfortable lifestyle that they'd never noticed someone else building the power to destroy it. My phone buzzed with a text from Bradley as I returned to my office. "Mom, can we have dinner tonight? Sophia is really upset about everything that's happening with her family." I stared at the message, feeling that familiar tug between maternal love and growing resentment. My son wanted to discuss his wife's feelings while remaining completely oblivious to mine. 7-0. I texted back my house. It was time for Bradley and I to have the conversation we should have had years ago. The afternoon brought a parade of panicked phone calls from various Harrison family members, all trying to understand what was happening to their comfortable world. I ignored most of them, but answered when Patricia Harrison called at 3:00 p.m. "Margaret, please, we need to talk. The family is in crisis. The family is experiencing accountability for the first time in decades." Patricia. I'd hardly call that a crisis. James came home looking like someone had died. He's locked himself in his study and won't speak to anyone. Perhaps he's reflecting on 30 years of mediocre business practices. This isn't just about business anymore, is it? This is personal revenge for what happened at the wedding. I leaned back in my office chair looking out at the Chicago skyline. Patricia, if I wanted personal revenge, your family would already be homeless. What I want is respect. And since your family only understands power, I'm speaking your language. What can we do to fix this? That depends entirely on how quickly your family learns to treat people with basic human decency. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing personnel files and financial records, preparing for the changes I'd implement over the coming weeks. But my mind kept drifting to the evening's dinner with Bradley and the conversation that would finally reveal how my son really saw me. At 6:30, I set the dining room table for 3, using my finest china and silver. If this was going to be a confrontation, it would at least be a civilized one. Bradley and Sophia arrived precisely at 7, both looking like they were attending a funeral rather than a family dinner. Sophia's eyes were red from crying, and Bradley wore the same expression he'd had as a child when he knew he was in trouble, but couldn't figure out how to fix it. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek awkwardly. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." "Of course, sweetheart, you're always welcome here." Dinner passed in uncomfortable small talk until I finally set down my fork and looked directly at my son. "Bradley, we need to discuss something that's been troubling me." His face went pale. What's wrong? Sophia told me about the conversations you had with her regarding my character specifically, your concerns about my being controlling and manipulative. The color drained completely from his face as he realized his wife had shared their private discussions. Mom. Those weren't. I was just trying to prepare her for what exactly? Bradley looked helplessly at Sophia, who was studying her plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. You've always been generous, maybe too generous, and I didn't want her to feel obligated to accept help if it came with strings attached. What strings, Bradley? You know, expectations that we'd have to live our lives according to your approval. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Can you give me a specific example of when I've attempted to control your life choices? Well, you had opinions about my college major. I suggested business classes might be practical. You majored in literature, and I supported your decision completely. And you didn't like some of the girls I dated. I disliked exactly one girlfriend, the one who stole money from your wallet and cheated on you with your roommate. You eventually agreed with my assessment. Bradley squirmed in his chair, clearly realizing his examples weren't supporting his case. The point is, I wanted Sophia to know she didn't have to accept your help if it made her uncomfortable. Except she did accept my help. You both did. $300, $1,000 worth of help. And we're grateful. No, Bradley, you're resentful. I stood up, my voice remaining calm despite the rage building inside me. You wanted my money, but not my presence. You wanted my support, but not my opinions. You wanted me to be a bank, not a mother. That's not true. Then explain to me why your wife felt comfortable calling me a pig in public. Explain to me why she believed her family would find that entertaining rather than horrifying. Sophia finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. Because I told them what Bradley said about you, about how you used money to stay involved in his life when he wanted independence. The words hung in the air like poison gas. I see. I walked to the window, looking out at my garden. So my financial support for your education, your car, your apartment, your wedding, all of that was manipulation rather than love. Mom, that's not what I meant. Actually, Bradley, I think it's exactly what you meant. I turned back to face them both. And you know what? You're right. I have been using money to maintain our relationship. Both of them stared at me in shock. But starting tomorrow, that ends completely. What do you mean it ends? Bradley's voice cracked slightly, and I recognized the tone from his childhood. The moment when he realized his actions had consequences he hadn't considered. I'm done being your ATM sweetheart. I walked back to the table, but remained standing, looking down at my son and his wife. No more birthday checks, Christmas gifts, emergency loans, or surprise assistance with bills. Mom, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You wanted independence from my supposed manipulation, and I'm giving it to you. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Effective immediately. You're financially independent. Sophia looked panic-stricken. Mrs. Harrison, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We never said we didn't want your support. No, dear. You just said I was using that support to control your lives. Well, problem solved. Bradley jumped up from his chair. This is crazy. One stupid comment at a wedding and you're cutting us off completely. One stupid comment. My voice remained dangerously calm. Bradley, your wife, called me a pig at your wedding while surrounded by her family who laughed along because you had already painted me as some kind of interfering burden they had to tolerate. I never called you a burden. You told her I had trouble letting go, that I treated you like a child, that I used money to maintain control. I counted off each point on my fingers. What would you call that characterization? Bradley sat back down heavily, finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd done. But Mom, I was trying to manage expectations. Sophia's family has money and I didn't want them to think you were some kind of charity case. So instead, you made me sound like a manipulative old woman who couldn't accept that her son had grown up. That's not what I meant, but it is what you said. And more importantly, it's what you believed. I walked to the sideboard and poured myself a glass of wine with steady hands. Tell me, Bradley, when exactly did I become such a burden to you? You're not a burden. When did helping you through college become manipulation? When did paying for your wedding become controlling behavior? When did loving you become something you needed to apologize for to your new in-laws? The silence stretched until Sophia finally spoke up. Mrs. Harrison, I think Bradley was just nervous about fitting in with my family. He wanted to seem independent and successful, and he couldn't seem independent and successful with a mother who supported him. My family, they can be judgmental about people who need help. Ah, I took a sip of wine. Finally, understanding the real dynamic. So you were both embarrassed by my generosity because it made you look weak to people whose opinion you valued more than mine. It's not that simple, Bradley protested. Actually, it's exactly that simple. I set down my glass and looked directly at my son. You were willing to take my money but ashamed to admit it came from me. You wanted the benefits of having a successful mother, but none of the social complications. Mom, please. Can't we just move past this? Oh, we're definitely moving past this, just not in the direction you're hoping. I walked to my purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found my attorney's number. What are you doing? Bradley asked nervously, calling Richard Patterson. He handles my estate planning. I hit dial and put the phone on speaker so they could hear both sides of the conversation. Margaret, how lovely to hear from you. How was the wedding? Educational Richard, I'm calling because I need to make some changes to my will. The silence from my dinner guests was deafening. Of course. What kind of changes are we talking about? I want to remove my son as primary beneficiary and establish a charitable foundation instead. Bradley shot to his feet so fast his chair fell over. Mom, you can't be serious. Richard, are you getting all this? My son seemed surprised that actions have consequences. Margaret, perhaps we should schedule a meeting to discuss this properly. Major estate changes shouldn't be made in emotional moments. This isn't emotional, Richard. It's logical. Why would I leave my assets to someone who sees my support as manipulation? Sophia started crying harder, and Bradley looked like he might be sick. I'll call you tomorrow to schedule an appointment. I told Richard, good evening. After hanging up, I looked at my son's stricken face and felt a pang of regret, but only a small one. Mom, please. I know I screwed up, but changing your will, that's extreme, is it? You've spent years accepting my financial support while privately resenting me for providing it. You've encouraged your wife to view me as an obstacle rather than an asset. You've allowed her family to mock me publicly while sitting silent. I can fix this. We can fix this. How, Bradley? How exactly do you fix years of taking someone for granted? I'll talk to Sophia's family. I'll make them understand that they were wrong about you. They weren't wrong about me, sweetheart. They were wrong about my willingness to tolerate disrespect. I walked back to the table and began clearing the dinner plates. Your wife apologized beautifully the other night, sincere, thoughtful, honest about her motivations. But you know what? She also revealed. I paused in my plate clearing to look directly at him, that every cruel thing she believed about me came from you. Bradley slumped back into his chair. I never meant for it to go this far. No, you just meant to have your cake and eat it too. Take my money while distancing yourself from any obligation to respect the person providing it. What can I do? His voice was barely a whisper. You can start by being honest with yourself about why you really resented my involvement in your life. I don't understand. You resented it because it reminded you that you weren't as independent and successful as you wanted to believe. Every time I helped you financially, it wounded your pride. Bradley stared at me with growing recognition. But instead of refusing the help or working harder to become truly self-sufficient, you chose a third option. accepting the money while vilifying the source. That's exactly what it was. And the sad part is, I would have respected an honest conversation about your feelings much more than this years-long campaign to paint me as the problem. I finished clearing the table and walked toward the kitchen, then paused in the doorway. Bradley, I love you. I will always love you. But I'm done enabling a relationship where love only flows in one direction. So what happens now? Now you learn what genuine independence feels like. And maybe, if you're very lucky, you'll discover that earning someone's respect is more satisfying than taking their support for granted. I left them sitting in my dining room and went to call Richard Patterson back. It was time to make some very real changes to my estate planning. After all, I had a charitable foundation to establish. Tuesday morning brought the expected fallout from Monday night's dinner, but not from the sources I'd anticipated. Instead of panicked calls from Bradley or Sophia, my phone rang at 7 a.m. with James Harrison's name on the caller ID. Mrs. Harrison, we have a problem. Good morning to you too. James. What seems to be the issue? 3 of our largest tenants received lease renewal notices yesterday demanding immediate rent increases averaging 40%. They're threatening to vacate. I smiled into my coffee cup. That's unfortunate. I'm sure we can find new tenants who appreciate fair market value. Mrs. Harrison, these companies have been with us for over 20 years. Johnson & Associates alone represents 12% of our rental income. James Johnson & Associates has been paying 1987 rates for premium downtown office space. They've enjoyed subsidized rent for 2 decades, while their own revenues increased exponentially. But if they leave, we'll lease their space to companies willing to pay what it's actually worth. I've already had preliminary conversations with 3 firms looking for downtown locations. This was true. I'd spent Monday afternoon making strategic phone calls while Bradley and Sophia processed their new reality. You can't make these kinds of decisions without consulting the board. James, I can make any decisions I want. That's what controlling interest means. I set down my coffee and walked to my home office. However, if you'd like to discuss this further, I'll be in the office at 9. Mrs. Harrison, please. My family built those relationships. Your family exploited those relationships. There's a difference. After hanging up, I reviewed the list of changes I'd planned for Harrison Industries. Rent increases were just the beginning. By the end of the week, I'd eliminate redundant positions, restructure the corporate hierarchy, and implement performance standards that would shock them into either productivity or resignation. My second call came from Patricia Harrison at 8:30. Her voice tight with barely controlled hysteria. Margaret James told me about the rent situation. You're going to destroy the company out of spite. I'm going to optimize the company's performance, Patricia. The fact that this threatens your family's comfortable incompetence isn't my concern. This has gone too far. We understand you were hurt by what happened at the wedding, but punishing everyone isn't the answer. Patricia let me explain something about punishment versus consequences. Punishment is what you do to hurt someone for past behavior. Consequences are what naturally follow from poor choices. I pulled into my office parking garage, noting that James' car was already there, despite our 9:00 a.m. meeting time. Your family has operated this business like a personal piggy bank for decades. You've hired relatives regardless of qualifications paid yourselves, excessive salaries for minimal work, and charged below market rents to maintain social relationships rather than maximize profits. That's how family businesses work. That's how family businesses fail, Patricia. But don't worry. Under my management, Harrison Industries will finally reach its potential. And what about our family's livelihood? What about it James can earn his salary by actually managing the company effectively? Your son can learn to do real marketing work or find employment elsewhere. Your nephew can master property management or discover what life is like outside the family safety net. I parked my car and gathered my briefcase, preparing for what would undoubtedly be an interesting day. Margaret, please. We're willing to negotiate. Negotiate what, Patricia? I already own the company. Your family already insulted me publicly. The time for negotiation passed when your daughter called me a pig. Sophia apologized. Yes, she did beautifully and sincerely. But apologies don't erase consequences. They just acknowledge them. Inside the Harrison Industries building, I could feel the tension radiating from every floor. Word had spread quickly about the changes I was implementing, and employees were buzzing with nervous energy. My assistant handed me a stack of messages as I entered my office. Mr. James has been here since 7:30, ma'am. He's called an emergency meeting with the senior staff for 10 sooner a.m. Cancel it, I said cheerfully. I'll be handling all communications with senior staff directly. At 9:00 a.m., Sharp James knocked on my door, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Mrs. Harrison, I need to understand your endgame here. Are you trying to force my family out of the company entirely? I'm trying to run a profitable business. James, if your family can adapt to professional standards, you're welcome to stay. If not, I shrugged. What would it take to resolve this situation? This situation doesn't need resolving, James. It needs completing. I pulled out a folder containing the organizational chart I developed over the weekend. Here's the new corporate structure. As you can see, I've eliminated several redundant positions and redistributed responsibilities based on actual qualifications rather than family relationships. James stared at the chart with growing horror. His son's marketing position was gone entirely. His nephew's property management role had been merged with facilities maintenance under an outside contractor. Even his own title had changed from president to general manager. You've gutted the entire operation. I've streamlined the operation. The company will run more efficiently with fewer people doing actual work rather than more people pretending to work. My family has run this company for 60 years, and for 60 years you've underperformed your potential. But don't worry, I'll show you what this company can really accomplish. James slumped in his chair, finally understanding that his comfortable world was disappearing permanently. Mrs. Harrison, what would it take for you to sell the company back to my family? The question hung in the air while I considered my response. Finally, I smiled. James, even if your family could afford to buy me out, which you can't, why would I sell a profitable business to people who've proven they can't manage it effectively? Because it's our legacy. It's my husband's legacy. Your family just happened to be managing it poorly. My phone buzzed with a text from Bradley. Mom, I've been thinking about everything you said. Can we please talk again? I want to make this right. I showed the message to James. Your family isn't the only one learning about consequences today. What do you mean? I mean, my son is discovering what life looks like when you can't take someone's support for granted. James looked confused, so I explained about Bradley's financial independence and my estate planning changes. You disinherited your own son. I'm considering it. He'll need to demonstrate that he values our relationship for more than just its financial benefits. That's incredibly harsh. James, your daughter, called me a pig at my son's wedding. Your family laughed along with the insult. My son had spent months priming his wife to see me as a burden rather than a blessing. I stood and walked to my office window, looking down at the busy Chicago street below. I'm 62 years old. I've spent the last 30 years building businesses, supporting family members, and generally making everyone else's life easier while my own needs came last. But surely, nothing, James. I'm done being taken for granted by people who benefit from my generosity while privately resenting my existence. I turned back to face him with a smile that made him visibly uncomfortable. But here's the beautiful thing about being in control of your own life. You get to decide who deserves your time, energy, and resources, And you've decided we don't deserve them. I've decided you need to earn them, all of you." My assistant knocked and entered with an urgent message. "Mrs. Harrison Bradley is in the lobby asking to see you. He says it's important." I looked at James, then at the message, then back at James. It seems today is full of people wanting to negotiate with reality. Should I send him up, my assistant asked? Yes, I decided. But James, our meeting is concluded. You have work to do if you want to keep your position here. As James left, I prepared myself for the next round of consequences. My son was about to learn that some apologies require more than words to be effective. Bradley walked into my office carrying a manila envelope and wearing an expression I'd never seen before. Humble, desperate, and finally genuinely contrite. Gone was the entitled confidence that had carried him through 31 years of life, with minimal consequences. "Mom, thank you for seeing me. Sit down, sweetheart." I gestured to the chair James had just vacated, still warm with his desperation. "I've been awake all night thinking about what you said yesterday about how I resented your help because it wounded my pride." He set the envelope on my desk. "You were right about everything." I waited, having learned that silence often revealed more truth than questions. I found something last night while I was going through old papers trying to figure out how everything went so wrong between us. He pushed the envelope toward me. "I think you should see this before we talk about anything else." Inside the envelope were photocopied bank statements, loan documents, and what appeared to be correspondence between Bradley and several financial institutions. I studied the papers with growing confusion. Bradley? What am I looking at? Evidence that I'm not just ungrateful. Mom, I'm also a fraud. My blood went cold. What do you mean? The consulting job I had before starting at Harrison Industries. I was fired 6 months ago for falsifying expense reports. The car payments you thought I was making, I stopped paying them in January. The bank was about to repossess the BMW when Sophia's father hired me. I stared at the documents trying to process what he was telling me. The apartment rent, the credit card bills, even the money I claimed to spend on Sophia's engagement ring. It all came from loans I took out using your name as collateral. Using my name. My voice was barely a whisper. I forged your signature on loan applications. Mom listed you as co-signer without your knowledge. The banks approved the loans because of your credit rating and business reputation. The room began to spin slightly. How much money are we talking about? Bradley, $87,000 in unsecured debt, plus the car loan, which is another $32,000. I set the papers down with shaking hands. You've been committing fraud using my identity for months. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that once I got established with Sophia's family, I'd be able to pay everything back before you ever found out. And the wedding expenses, the $300,000 I paid directly, I needed that money to stay afloat, Mom, to keep up appearances until I could figure out a permanent solution. I stood up and walked to my office window, trying to breathe normally, while my world rearranged itself around this new reality. So when you told Sophia I was controlling and manipulative, you were actually describing yourself. Yes. His voice broke completely. I was projecting my own behavior onto you because I couldn't face what I'd become. I turned back to him, seeing my son clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Not the successful, independent man I'd believed I was raising, but someone who'd been lying, stealing, and manipulating his way through life while blaming others for his problems. Bradley, do you understand what you've done? This isn't just about money. I know, I've destroyed your trust. I've committed crimes using your identity. I've ruined everything. You've also put me at legal risk. If those banks discover the forged signatures, they won't. I mean, they shouldn't. The loans are current as long as I keep making minimum payments from my new salary. And if you can't make those payments, then you'd be liable for the full amounts plus interest and penalties. I sat back down, my mind racing through the legal and financial implications. identity theft, fraud, forgery. These weren't just family relationship issues. They were federal crimes. Why Bradley? Why risk everything for a lifestyle you couldn't afford? Because I was ashamed. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face. Sophia's family has so much money, and I wanted to be worthy of her. I wanted to be successful and independent like you raised me to be. But you weren't independent. You were drowning in debt while pretending to be successful. I know. And when you offered to pay for the wedding, I saw it as my salvation. I thought if I could just get through the first year of marriage, establish myself with her family, maybe get promoted or find a better job. You thought you could lie your way to success. I thought I could buy enough time to make it true. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my attorney's number. "What are you doing?" Bradley asked in panic. "Calling Richard Patterson. We need legal advice about how to handle this situation. Mom, please. If this becomes public, it'll destroy my marriage, my career, everything." "Bradley, it's already destroyed. The question now is how much damage we can contain." I hit dial and waited for Richard to answer. "Margaret twice in 2 days. Are you having an estate planning crisis? Richard, I need to see you immediately. My son has just confessed to committing identity theft using my name to secure fraudulent loans." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted several seconds. How much money are we talking about? Approximately $120,000 in various loans and credit agreements. Jesus, Margaret, when can you be here? Give me an hour. After hanging up, I looked at my son, this stranger who'd been masquerading as the man I thought I'd raised. "Bradley, here's what's going to happen. We're going to see my attorney and determine the best way to resolve this legally. You're going to cooperate fully with whatever course of action he recommends. And then you're going to learn what accountability actually means. Are you going to have me arrested?" The question hung between us while I considered my options. On one hand, Bradley was my son, and despite everything, I loved him. On the other hand, he'd committed serious crimes that could have destroyed my reputation and financial stability. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But I'll tell you this. The days of protecting you from the consequences of your choices are over, permanently." Bradley nodded miserably. "I understand, do you? Because I don't think you've understood consequences at all up to this point. I'm ready to face whatever happens. We'll see." I gathered the loan documents and put them back in the envelope, my hands steadier now than they'd been when I first read them. "One more question, Bradley. Does Sophia know about any of this?" "No. She thinks I'm successful and financially stable. She has no idea about the loans or the job situation, so she married you under false pretenses." "I guess yes." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and responsible, who'd instead become a liar and a criminal, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The next conversation would be with Richard Patterson about damage control and legal strategy, but the conversation after that would be with Sophia Harrison about the man she'd actually married. Because if my family was going to fall apart, at least it would be based on truth instead of lies. 3 hours later, I sat in Richard Patterson's law office with Bradley beside me, watching my attorney review the evidence of my son's systematic fraud with the grim professionalism of a man who'd seen too many family disasters. "The good news," Richard finally said, "is that we can resolve this without criminal charges if we act quickly and strategically." Bradley sagged with relief, but I remained tense. What's the bad news? The bad news is that Margaret will need to assume responsibility for all the debts to protect her own credit rating and reputation. If the banks discover the forged signatures, they'll pursue both civil and criminal remedies. "How much will this cost me in total?" Richard consulted his notes. "Approximately $137,000 to pay off all existing loans, plus interest and penalties. However, if we handle this correctly, we can characterize the payments as family assistance rather than fraud remediation. I looked at Bradley, who was staring at his hands in shame. And what happens to my son? Bradley will sign confession documents acknowledging his actions, agree to immediate repayment terms, and submit to financial monitoring for the next 5 years. He'll also need to undergo counseling for gambling and financial addiction. I don't have a gambling problem, Bradley protested weakly. You forged your mother's signature on loan documents to maintain a lifestyle you couldn't afford, Richard said sharply. That's addictive behavior regardless of the underlying compulsion. I stood and walked to the window overlooking downtown Chicago, the same view I'd been staring at for the past week, while my life rearranged itself around unwelcome truths. Richard, prepare whatever documents you need. I'll cover the debts and Bradley will comply with your repayment plan. Mom, I can't ask you to. You're not asking Bradley. I'm deciding because unlike you, I take responsibility for cleaning up messes instead of creating bigger ones. Richard handed us several documents to sign, and within an hour the legal framework was in place. Bradley would keep his job at Harrison Industries, but every penny of his salary above basic living expenses would go toward repaying me. It would take him approximately 8 years. As we left Richard's office, Bradley finally asked the question I'd been waiting for. What happens with Sophia? Are you going to tell her about the loans and the lies I'm going to tell her the truth? Bradley, something you should have done before you married her. She'll leave me. She might, but she deserves to make that choice based on reality instead of fantasy. We drove back to Harrison Industries in silence, both lost in our own thoughts about the wreckage we'd discovered. When we arrived, my assistant handed me an urgent message. Mrs. Harrison Sophia called 3 times asking to meet with you. She sounded quite distressed. Did she say, what about something about discovering financial documents in Bradley's home office? Bradley went white. Oh God, she found the loan papers I'd hidden. It seems Sophia Harrison was about to learn some uncomfortable truths about her new husband, whether I told her or not. An hour later, Sophia sat in my office crying hysterically, while Bradley slumped in the chair beside her, no longer even attempting to maintain his facade. I found loan applications with your signature, Mrs. Harrison, except the handwriting didn't match the signature on our wedding checks. She looked between Bradley and me with red-rimmed eyes. Bradley forged your name, didn't he? Yes, I said simply. How much money? More than you want to know. Sophia turned to her husband with the expression of complete bewilderment. Who are you? Because you're not the man I married. I'm the same person. No, the person I married had a successful career and financial stability. The person I married wasn't drowning in debt and committing crimes to hide it. She stood up and began pacing around my office like a caged animal. My father hired you at Harrison Industries because I begged him to help my husband advance his career. But you didn't need career advancement. You needed fraud intervention. Sophia, please. How long have you been lying to me, Bradley, since we started dating? Since we got engaged? Since we said our vows? The questions came rapid fire, and Bradley had no answers that wouldn't make things worse. Finally, Sophia turned to me. Mrs. Harrison, I owe you more than an apology for calling you a pig. I owe you an apology for marrying your son under false pretenses and dragging you into our mess. Sophia, no. Let me finish. You paid for our wedding. You've been supporting Bradley financially for years, and now you're cleaning up his criminal activity. Meanwhile, I've been resenting you for being too involved in his life. She sat back down, her composure completely shattered. The truth is, you haven't been involved enough. If you'd known what he was really like, maybe you could have stopped this before it destroyed everything. I looked at this young woman who'd called me a pig 6 days earlier and now sat in my office facing the collapse of her marriage and possibly her family's business relationships. Sophia. What do you want to do now? I want to go home to my parents and pretend this never happened. But I can't, can I? Because my family's business relationship with you depends on how I handle this situation. She was sharper than I'd given her credit for. Your family's business relationship with me depends on whether they can adapt to professional standards. Your marriage is a separate issue entirely. Is it Bradley works for my father now? If I leave him, it creates complications for everyone. I studied her face, seeing someone much younger and more vulnerable than the confident woman who'd insulted me at her wedding reception. Sophia, can I give you some advice from someone who's been making hard choices for 30 years? She nodded. Don't make marriage decisions based on business complications. Don't make life choices based on other people's convenience. And don't stay with someone because leaving would be messy. But if I leave Bradley, what happens to him? He'll lose his job, his apartment, everything. That's not your responsibility anymore. But he's sick, isn't he? This fraud and lying behavior, that's not normal. She was grasping for reasons to stay, and I recognized the impulse. I'd spent years making excuses for Bradley's increasingly irresponsible behavior. Yes, he probably needs professional help, but you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. And you can't love someone into becoming the person you thought they were. Sophia looked at Bradley, who was staring out my office window as if he could escape this conversation by pure willpower. I need time to think, she said finally. This is all too much to process right now. After they left, I sat alone in my office reviewing the events of the past week. In 6 days, I'd gone from being an insulted mother of the groom to a woman who'd reclaimed her power, restructured a company, and discovered her son was a criminal. The old Margaret would have quietly paid Bradley's debts, covered up his crimes, and continued enabling his dysfunction while accepting his resentment as the price of his love. But the new Margaret, the one who'd emerged when Sophia called her a pig, had different priorities. My phone rang with a call from Patricia Harrison. Margaret Sophia came home in tears. She won't tell us what happened, but James is convinced you've done something to destroy our family. Patricia, your family is destroying itself. I'm just refusing to enable the process. What does that mean? It means consequences, Patricia. Something your family has successfully avoided for decades. Margaret, please. We understand you're angry about the wedding incident, but surely we can resolve this as reasonable people. I laughed, surprising myself with the sound. Patricia, you keep saying that as if the problem is my anger rather than your family's behavior. But here's what I've learned this week. Anger is just information. It tells you when someone has crossed a boundary you should have established years ago. So what happens now? Now your family learns to earn things instead of expecting them. Your daughter learns that marriage requires honesty. Your husband learns that business requires competence. And your son-in-law learns that crimes have consequences. You're destroying everything we've built. No, Patricia. I'm revealing what you actually built versus what you pretended to build. The destruction was already there. I just stopped pretending not to see it. After hanging up, I walked to my office window and looked down at the Chicago street below, watching people hurry past with their own complicated lives and hidden struggles. 6 days ago, I'd been called a pig at my son's wedding. Today, I was a woman who discovered her own power and decided to use it. The old Margaret would have called that a tragedy. The new Margaret called it a beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Harrison, this is Sophia. Thank you for your honesty today. I'm going to stay with my parents while I figure things out. I hope we can talk again soon when everything isn't so complicated. I smiled and typed back, take all the time you need, and Sophia, you're stronger than you know. Outside my window, Chicago continued its eternal dance of ambition and consequence. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was dancing instead of just watching from the sidelines. After all, it's never too late to stop being taken for granted, even by yourself. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.